They thought I'd sign whatever they put in front of me. They thought 63 years of living had made me soft. Maybe it had. For a while. I built my career with my hands and my head. 40 years as a structural engineer in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Bridges, overpasses, the kind of infrastructure that holds a city together without anyone noticing it's there. That was always fine by me. I never needed to be noticed. I had my wife Pauline, my daughter, and later my son-in-law. I had a house on the South Shore that I'd paid off by 50. I had a workshop in the basement where I spent my evenings. I had enough. Pauline died in February of 2019, just before the world changed. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I don't talk about those 6 weeks. I still can't. What I will say is this. Grief does something to a man's edges. It rounds them off. You stop being sharp because sharp things hurt, and you're already hurting enough. You lean on people. You trust people. You say yes when you should say nothing at all. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is to me, whatever she decided later. She came down from Toronto the week after the funeral. She stayed for 3 weeks. She cooked. She cleaned out the freezer. She cried with me at the kitchen table and held my hand and said, "Dad, you don't have to do this alone." I believed her. Her husband came the following weekend. He was a financial advisor, the kind who wore clothes that cost more than my first car and had opinions about everything except the things that actually mattered. He'd never liked me much, though he was careful about it. Polite careful. The kind of careful that takes practice. He sat across from me at that same kitchen table with a folder and a warm smile and said he wanted to help me get organized. The estate was complicated, he said. The house, the investments, the pension. It was a lot for one person to manage alone. Pauline had handled a lot of the day-to-day finances. That part was true. He said he knew people. He could simplify things. I was 62 years old, recently widowed and sitting in a house that still smelled like Pauline's shampoo. I said yes. Over the next few months, I signed things. I'm not proud of that. I signed a durable power of attorney that gave my son-in-law authority to manage my financial accounts in the event of incapacity. I let him move my savings into a managed portfolio he controlled. I spent 34 years in construction management. And the one thing is protection, as simplification. He framed it as love. I kept working though I'd wound down to consulting. I still had my workshop. I still drove out to the shore on Sunday mornings. The edges of my grief softened just enough to feel like living again. Then I started noticing things. Small things at first. A withdrawal I didn't remember authorizing. A quarterly statement that showed a balance lower than I expected. I mentioned it to my son-in-law, and he had an explanation ready. Always ready. The way a man who has rehearsed something always has the answer before you finish asking the question. Market fluctuation. A fee structure. A reallocation. I let it go. Twice. Maybe 3 times. It was my neighbor, a retired accountant who'd known me since before my daughter was born, who finally said what I hadn't let myself think. We were standing in his driveway in October, first real frost of the year, and I mentioned offhand that I was thinking of selling the South Shore property. He asked who was handling the transaction. When I told him, he went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Have you had anyone independent look at your accounts lately?" I said I trusted my family. He said, "That's not what I asked." I drove home and I sat in the workshop for 2 hours. I didn't build anything. I just sat. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not a family friend, not anyone my son-in-law might know. A woman in Dartmouth who specialized in elder financial abuse and estate law. Her name was Miss Okafor, and she had the kind of voice that made you feel like the room had just gotten sturdier. I brought every document I could find. Bank statements, the power of attorney, the portfolio agreements, letters, everything. She went through them for nearly 3 hours. When she looked up at me, she didn't say anything immediately. She poured us both a coffee. Then she said, "Mr. Ashworth, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Over 18 months, my son-in-law had transferred approximately $340,000 from my accounts, a combination of my savings, the proceeds of a locked-in retirement account he'd liquidated without my full understanding, and funds redirected from a joint account my daughter had access to. The power of attorney had been worded broadly enough that several of these transfers had the appearance of legitimacy. Appearance. My daughter had signed off on at least 4 of the transfers. I sat with that for a long time. Miss Dordnord, Okafor said, "Do you want to proceed?" I said yes. Then I said, "But I want to do this right. I don't want to move until we're ready." She nodded. She said, "Good, because if we move too early, they'll see it coming." What happened next took 7 months. 7 months of acting like everything was normal, of answering my son in law's calls, of attending Sunday dinners in Toronto twice, of nodding along when he talked about the portfolio and the long game of financial planning. I smiled. I asked questions. I made think Curtis exactly what he'd always believed I was, a grieving old man who didn't understand money. Meanwhile, Miss Okafor and a forensic accountant she worked with were building a case. Every transfer, every signature, every date. We engaged the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. We engaged the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee of Nova Scotia. We documented everything. There was one particular piece of evidence that I found myself in Pauline's old filing cabinet, which my son in law had never thought to ask about. I found a copy of her original will, a handwritten note she'd left alongside it, in her own handwriting, describing a conversation she'd had with him 8 months before she died. She'd had concerns. She'd written them down the way organized people do when they feel uncertain about something but don't want to upset the people they love. Pauline always wanted to believe the best of people. I kept that note in my workshop, under a loose floorboard for 7 months. The legal proceedings began in the spring. My son-in-law and daughter had received no warning. The first they knew was when the freezing order was applied to their joint accounts. The same morning, my son-in-law was scheduled to liquidate the last significant asset in the managed portfolio. They were 12 hours away from moving the money somewhere I'd never find it. My daughter called me 4 times that morning. I didn't answer. The civil hearing was held at the Nova Scotia Supreme Court in Halifax. I wore a dark grey suit and a tie Pauline had given me for our 30th anniversary. I had Miss Okafor beside me. I had the forensic accountant's report. I had bank records, transfer histories, correspondence, and one handwritten note from a woman who'd seen something coming and trusted the right people enough to write it down. My son-in-law arrived with a lawyer who charged $400 an hour and wore that same expression. Polished, certain, faintly bored. My daughter sat beside him. She didn't look at me when they entered the room, not once. His lawyer opened by characterizing the financial activity as routine account management. Legitimate, transparent, authorized. He suggested I was confused, that my grief had led to misremembering the nature of agreements I'd freely entered into. My son-in-law nodded along, confident. My daughter looked at her hands. When Miss Okafor presented the forensic accounting report, their lawyer objected twice. The judge, a methodical woman who had clearly read every document in advance, overruled both objections without looking up from her notes. Then Miss Collis. Okafor introduced Pauline's note. The courtroom changed. I can't explain it any other way. The temperature didn't change. The people didn't move. But something shifted, the way the air shifts before a storm. His lawyer asked to approach. The judge allowed it. They spoke quietly. Then the judge read the note herself, from beginning to end, without expression. She set it down. She looked at my son-in-law. She said, "I'd like to hear your explanation for the transaction dated March 14th of last year." He began to answer. He had an answer, of course. He always had an answer. Of course, he always had an answer. But this time, he'd made a mistake. The transaction he was explaining, the one he said was authorized and routine, was dated 2 weeks after the power of attorney had technically lapsed due to a clause that his own lawyer had overlooked. Miss Okafor had found it. The forensic accountant had flagged it. We had said nothing about it until this exact moment. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something to him. He stopped mid-sentence. The room was very quiet. The judge did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. She said calmly and clearly that based on the evidence presented, she was satisfied that the transactions in question constituted financial exploitation under Nova Scotia's Adult Capacity and Decision-Making Act, and that the power of attorney had been used in a manner inconsistent with its legal scope. She ordered the freezing of all remaining assets. She referred the matter to the RCMP for criminal investigation under Section 331 of the Criminal Code, theft by a person holding power of attorney. My son-in-law's face went the color of old snow. My daughter made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and I finally looked at her. Really looked at her. She looked back at me for the first time since she'd walked in. I don't know what she was trying to say. I don't think she knew either. I spent 44 years in construction management. And the one thing this construction management, I spent thing this industry teaches you. One count of fraud over $5,000. He was sentenced to 22 months in federal custody and 3 years of probation. He was ordered to make full restitution, $338,500, which accounted for the recovered funds minus fees already assessed. My daughter entered a peace bond. She cooperated with investigators. She was not charged criminally, but her name is part of the public record. I recovered $312,000. The rest had been spent on things I choose not to think about. I sold the managed portfolio and moved everything to a firm Minzoka Ford recommended. People who don't know my son-in-law and never will. I updated my will. I revised the power of attorney with language so precise it took 2 full afternoons to draft. I still have the workshop. I still drive to the shore on Sundays. I still use the coffee mug Pauline bought me at a farmer's market in Lunenburg this summer before she got sick. It has a small chip in the handle and I'll never replace it. Some people have asked me how I stayed calm through all of it. How I sat at those Sunday dinners and smiled and said nothing for 7 months. I think about how Pauline wrote things down. How she noticed something was wrong and she didn't dismiss it. Didn't let herself be talked out of it. She put it on paper in her own handwriting. She left it where she believed the right person would eventually find it. She knew me better than anyone ever has. I wasn't calm because I'm strong. I was calm because I was finishing something she started, and I was not going to let her down. The gavel came down on a Tuesday. I drove back to Halifax, stopped at the shore, and sat in my car for a while looking at the water. It was early May, still cold. The kind of grey that maritimers know doesn't mean anything bad. It just means you're home. I thought about Pauline. I thought about the note in her handwriting. Then I started the car and drove home. I still think about the filing cabinet sometimes. That old grey thing Pauline kept in the corner of the spare room, full of folders nobody ever asked about. My son-in-law walked past it dozens of times. He never once thought to open it. That's the thing about people who believe they're smarter than everyone else. They stop paying attention. What happened to me didn't happen because I was careless. It happened because I was grieving. And grief has a way of making you want to believe the people closest to you are safe. That's not weakness, that's human. But I've learned there's a difference between trusting someone and handing them the keys to everything you built without watching where they drive. I don't think my son-in-law woke up one morning and decided to become the kind of man he turned out to be. I think it happened gradually. One small justification at a time. One transfer that seemed harmless. One boundary crossed so quietly that he convinced himself it didn't count. That's how integrity erodes. Not all at once. Slowly, in private, where nobody's watching. And the people who do that always believe they've been clever enough to make it permanent. They're wrong. What I had that he didn't was patience, and the willingness to be honest with myself when my neighbor asked that question in the driveway. Most people, when they sense something is wrong, look for reasons to dismiss it. It's easier. I almost did the same thing. But I stopped and I sat with the discomfort instead of running from it, and that made every difference. Missing. Okafor once said to me, halfway through those 7 months of waiting, the hardest part of what you're doing is staying still. She was right. Every instinct I had wanted to confront them, to say something, to stop pretending. But I'd spent 40 years in engineer, and the one thing this industry teaches you, and to think this infrastructure is ready, everything collapses the wrong way. You wait, you build, you make sure the thing holds before you let it bear weight. Polly knew something was wrong before I did. She didn't have evidence. She just had that quiet, clear-eyed sense that good people develop over a lifetime of paying attention to what's actually true versus what someone wants you to believe. She wrote it down. She left it where I could find it. That was her intelligence and her decency working together long after she was gone. I got $312,000 back. I got my house, I got my workshop and my Sunday mornings at the shore. What I can't get back is the version of my daughter I thought I knew. That grief is different from losing Pauline. But it is grief. What I can say is this: the truth doesn't need help. It just needs time and someone willing to stand behind it. I'm 63 years old and I'm still standing.